Our minds are said to be comparable to supercomputers, yet they can sometimes be faulty and causes us to perceive things differently from what they actually are. We lose objectivity when our lenses become blurry from the past perception that we have most of the time. These perceptions cause us more pain than we actually have to endure. These messed up perceptions can be caused by what is called cognitive distortions. To describe it, according to Wikipedia, cognitive distortion is an exaggerated or irrational thought pattern involved in the onset or perpetuation of psychopathological states such as depression and anxiety. Key word here is irrational, as in irrationally perceiving reality and making inaccurate conclusions based on said irrational perceptions, and would at times lead to mental illnesses such as anxiety and depression. Many things can cause this type of thinking, but the leading cause can be said to be the heightened emotions. Anger, sadness, shame, and guilt are among this. And when these emotions do lead to cognitive distortions, they can take certain forms. There are many kinds of cognitive distortion that a person can use, and most of the times, actually almost all the times, they don't even know that they are using it. They aren't aware of this activity that they are doing. Knowing these distortions can help us become more rational in our way of thinking, help ourselves to think clearly, and prevent us from needless suffering. Number 1. Polarization, or the all or nothing thinking. This distortion involves the need to be perfect, perfectionism. It is seeing everything as black or white, especially toward yourself. This type of thinking causes you to be terrified of making mistakes in your life and that everything must go smoothly. For example, say that you only got 80% in a test and you already see yourself as a failure for not getting the results that you wanted, which is 100%. Or your sibling, whom you love dearly, made a mistake towards you, and now you won't talk to them because you see them as a hindrance or an annoyance and will forever see them as someone that has hurt you. As you can see, this type of thinking is very damaging and logically impossible to placate because there are no absolutes in this world. Your room will never be completely clean, but it won't be completely unclean as well. No one is completely ugly nor completely beautiful. Don't discredit your efforts just because you didn't get it to be perfect. The next one is overgeneralization. It involves taking one incident in your life and using it as a frame of reference for anything similar to it. A good example of this would be, let's say, a boy confessing his attraction to the girl he admires. Let's say that she rejected him. This rejection caused him to perceive that no girl would actually like him, leading him to the notion that every girl he would confess to would end up denying him, and in response, he doesn't even try anymore. Another example would be a woman whom her significant other or husband cheated on her with another woman. This caused her to believe that every man is a cheater and that she should never trust any man again, leading her to never date again. From these two examples, we can see that they each had both a bad experience that became their perception of reality, which they used to generalize any specific interaction or encounter. We can see how these two examples are wrong, basically in the fact that not every man or woman are the same. Each person has their own specific attraction for another individual, in that each person also have their own set of values and principles that they hold dear. If a girl doesn't like you, she just might have a different type, and that's not you. But doesn't everyone have their own type, especially you? Now, if your husband cheats on you, he might have some faulty values, but that is not to say that all men would be like him. Not all men would be would have the value of cheating on others. This is somewhat similar to a stigma and a stereotype, but the real damage would be towards you. You'll end up cutting off yourself from real people, and even if you don't, you'll tend to worry that they'll just be like the others. You'd want to confirm the bias that you have. To add to this doesn't only apply to relationships, it applies to everything. Say that you have a car, and one morning you'll see bird poop on top. In your frustration, you might say, "Birds always poop on my car." But then think back to your past and realize that that isn't really the case. Another would be that your boss always gives you so much work, then you realize that's the first time they gave you too much work. And in the past, they're actually quite lenient with you. There are times in our life when we will have a good day, a great day even. We wake up refreshed, breakfast was delicious, no traffic going to work or school, you have a great time with your friends or family, but then something frustrating or mildly frustrating happens. Say traffic going back home was heavy, or while eating, you got a bit of sauce on your shirt, or maybe it rained and your suit got wet or your uniform got wet. Then all your positive vibe for the day goes down the drain. You go back home and still you feel miserable and kept dwelling on the negative things that happened for the day, discounting the good things that did happen. This is what mental filtering is. Mental filter sifts through everything good and focus only on the negative and see the whole situation as negative. Another good example for this is, say that you are an employee and you had an employee evaluation. And for the first and middle part, the evaluator complimented you and your work ethic. They also said that your overall performance was good. But at the final part of the evaluation, the evaluator told you of certain areas that needs improvement. After the evaluation, you then sink your thoughts on those few flaws that you had, discarding the good things that you did and the evaluator complimented you on. This filtering is very common to those with depression, but it can also happen to anyone and lead you to other self-deprecating thoughts and cause you needless suffering. The previous distortion involves ignoring everything but the negative. For this one, you're not just ignoring the positive or neutral things. Instead, you find a way to turn those positive and neutral things to negative. Disqualifying the positive involves being biased towards yourself and your actions. You never see anything you do as something of worth, and you perceive that others think the same. The best example would be is how we receive compliments. When people compliment you, you tend to think that they're just being kind as a courtesy, or they're just saying that to be nice. You tend to think yourself as lesser and try to use everything that happens as proof that you are. When you do something good, you'll tell yourself that was just a fluke. I was just lucky. When you do something bad or when you make a mistake, you'll say, I knew it. This just proves that I'm second rate, or things along those lines. This distortion is very common to most people, but if done too much, it can lead to undermining yourself and leading to low self-esteem. Jumping to conclusions. As the name suggests, you immediately make a negative conclusion about anything that happens that arouses your negative emotions. Conclusion that has no basis or evidence whatsoever. This can be done in two ways. One is mind reading, the other is fortune telling. For the first one, you tend to think that people are thinking negatively of you in most situations. Examples of this would be, say, that you're giving a presentation and some of the audiences are yawning, or maybe they're fighting off their sleep even. You'll tend to think to yourself, I'm probably boring them. Unknown to you, they might just be a group of friends who were partying late last night and didn't get much sleep. Another example, Say that your boyfriend or girlfriend had a bad day at work and is being quiet, but you end up thinking, they're mad at me. Why are not they saying anything? Did I do something to make them angry? For the second one, fortune telling, you tend to make negative predictions. Everything that foretells you that you will experience something bad, even though most of them are unrealistic. Say that you have a test tomorrow and you studied up late last night, and once the test paper comes to you, you already think that you're gonna fail, even though you studied so much last night. A good example for both of this would be that you texted your significant other and they didn't reply to you for hours, say. Then you think to yourself, do they not love me anymore? Then you think to yourself of calling them, but then you think also that they'll probably think I'm annoying if I call them. Then you distance yourself, then you get into an argument leading to a self-fulfilling prophecy. But then you find out that the reason they didn't reply to you is that the message went to the spam folder of their phone and that they didn't even see the message. So they didn't get to read it. All that suffering for a simple misunderstanding, suffering that you yourself place yourself into. Magnification or minimization, or some would like to call it the binocular trick. This is another distortion that can lead to having an inferiority complex. This distortion involves exaggerating your mistakes, flaws, and fears, making so much of a big deal out of them, catastrophizing your faults as some world-ender thing. That is magnification. For example, you make a simple mistake, such as a typo in an essay that you submitted to your teacher. Let's say that it's a really simple typo. It's like one letter. But then you think to yourself that everything is over because you'll certainly fail that essay because of one simple spelling mistake. The other one is minimization. It is the opposite, but instead of minimizing your imperfections, you tend to minimize your strengths, thinking they're nothing in particular and they have no relevancy. A good example of this would be, say that you're really good at drawing or painting, and most people that you know compliment you about it, but you think to yourself that it's not a useful skill and that you're not really that good at it. You're not just being humble, you're also degrading yourself. If you do these distortions, no wonder you'll think yourself as inferior to those around you, but not because of you yourself and your skills, but because of the lenses you are using to see your strengths and weaknesses. Emotional reasoning. You know the Rene Descartes quote, I think, therefore I am? Well, the best way to sum up emotional reasoning is I feel, therefore I am. This distortion is probably the most pivotal one because it uses the emotions you feel to distort your view of the truth. It is a very misleading distortion because the way you feel reflects the way you think and what you believe, regardless of what the facts are. There are many examples of this, and you can see in the image that I'll show of what it tends to be. This distortion plays a big role in many depressed people, most of them actually, because since everything feels so negative to them, they assume that they truly are. It doesn't occur to them to challenge these feelings. One usual byproduct of this distortion is procrastination. You have a lot of work to do, but you tend to not do them because you think it would be impossible to finish all of them, because there are so many of them. A month passes and you suddenly have the energy to do this task. Then you do them, and lo and behold, you were able to finish all of them in maybe a little less than a week. You were just fooling yourself that you can't do it, but you actually can. should statements. These distortions can't immediately be recognized until you learn of it, because it is usually disguised as self-motivation. Should statements are anything that you need to do, and adding the word should in it. I should have done that. I should have done this. I should have done better. But this can also apply to those around you by saying they should have done better. They should have been able to do a simple thing. Or directly telling them you should have been more productive. You shouldn't be so self-centered. Whether towards others or yourself though, most of the damage is on you. Now you might say that there is nothing wrong with this and it can motivate people. But these types of statement actually arouses unneeded emotional turmoil from the person using it. People tend to forget that they're only human and have limitations, make mistakes and prone to error. Not being able to recognize and telling yourself should statements create self-loathing, shame and unnecessary guilt within you. By not recognizing other people are also human and not perfect, you feel bitter and self-righteous towards their mistakes. When this continues for a long time, you either change your expectations of yourself and others, or you'll always end up disappointed and bitter with yourself and those around you. Labeling and mislabeling. This type of distortion is similar to overgeneralization, but it takes it to another level. As the name suggests, labeling involves putting labels on yourself and on others based on negative images that you perceive. Basically, measuring a person's worth by their mistakes. Most people do this by starting with I am statements. For example, you're playing basketball and you miss the hoop when you went for a 3-point shot. You tell yourself, I am a loser, instead of I miscalculated the shot. Or maybe you were drafting an email and you forgot to attach the file that needed to be sent. You say, I'm such a failure, instead of I made a mistake. This leads you to self-defeat and lowers your self-confidence. The fundamental falseness of these labels lies in the fact that they are irrational. You are not defined by any one thing that you do, especially those of your failures. You're a complex human being that has many interests and varying skills with memories of your whole life and have intertwining experiences with others. You are a river that continuously change over the time as the running waters continue to flow, not a still lake that is constrained by land. Should you be called a sleeper just because you sleep every night? Should you be called a baiter just because you bait every day? Or should you be called a breeder because you read for every second of your life? Ridiculous, isn't it? But this ridiculousness can turn into something painful if you base it on your mistakes. And this goes for other people as well when you label them. Mislabeling, on the other hand, involves putting inaccurate labels on yourself based on heavily loaded feelings. Say, for example, that you are starting a new exercise routine and you had to skip a day. You tell yourself, why am I so lazy? I'm such a sloth. And you end up skipping even more days because of how upset you are with yourself. This distortion is the most source of guilt, and it's always unnecessary. It involves taking responsibility for negative events that you don't even need to. You tend to think that things are your fault, even if it's not, or reflects your inadequacy to solve a problem that you are incapable of. For example, a child that had their parents get a divorce because they were arguing about him would think that it's his fault that they separated in the first place. Or a single father raising a single child got a report from the school that his son got into a fight and thought, I'm such a failure as a father. Personalization makes you feel guilty of things you can't even control and makes you carry burdensome responsibility. that shouldn't be yours in the first place, and causes you to get paralyzed because you're trying to be Atlas, trying to carry the world on your shoulders. Don't confuse influence with control. Sure, you can influence them with your words and actions, but in the end, you can't control what they eventually do. What they actually do with their lives is ultimately up to them. As you have watched, you can see that cognitive distortions are very powerful illusions of the mind. And you might think, why is that? They're simply thoughts, so how do you continually get fooled by them and keep making the same mistake? It's because they feel right to you, because of those emotions that they produce. The thought themselves create the emotion and lead you to think that they are right. But here's the thing. Your feelings aren't facts. They're not the truth. They're just a reflection of what you think. There are times when emotions feel genuine, real, and valid, like when we're enjoying ourselves and being happy. And the thoughts that cause those emotions are undistorted as well. That's why when thoughts do become distorted, they still feel valid and realistic to us, even if they're not. And once those distorted thoughts lead to depression, they become even harder to distinguish. Knowing about these distortions and recognizing them in yourself is half the battle. In a future video, we'll tackle what can be done about it. But for now, I hope that you enjoyed the video, and please subscribe and like the video if you liked it. Thank you.